I said, they're going to build a dome over the town. She's like, what? She says, you're crazy, go to sleep. I said, no. I said, back in the day, the University of Minnesota and a bunch of bigwigs put together this plan to have this utopia from 200 to 300,000 people, the whole 9 yards. I said, just the perfect sci-fi setting.
In 1966, the Minnesota Experimental City was proposed by futurist Athelstan Spilhaus as a triumph over the urban tragedies of the 60s, such as overflowing city systems resulting from rapid population growth and air and water pollution. While the planning for the experimental city succeeded for a time with the support of Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the project quickly lost support when the residents of one of the proposed construction sites protested, believing the project to be a tragedy that would change their way of life. While the project failed due to loss of public support, many ideas presented by the experimental city have triumphed through time to be implemented today. The urban renewal movement sought to solve urban problems caused by rapid population growth, such as suburban sprawl and urban blight. However, instead of solving these problems, the movement only intensified them.
A lot of the dysfunction in our cities in this country had to do with things that, we had created. The interstate highway system was a really good thing, but at the same time as the interstate highway system went into was built in the cities of this country, it was very disruptive to existing neighborhoods. Existing neighborhoods were split in two, and
by the 1960s, there was a sense that something must be done about these urban tragedies and about the increasingly problematic issue of air and water pollution.
Twelve, 11, 10, 9, ignition sequence start.
During the 60s, there was this sense of, a can-do spirit that we can put people in outer space. We can solve a lot of our problems through new technologies.
The New Town movement was a movement that sought to triumph over urban problems using the technological solutions of the times to build futuristic utopian communities. Athelstan Spilhaus, the dean of the University of Minnesota's Institute of Technology, was one of these futuristic planners. In 1966, he published his idea of an experimental city in his comic series titled Our New Age. The comic series was widely distributed in newspapers throughout America and introduced scientific answers to problems such as traffic and pollution, proposing ideas that sound remarkably like the internet, electric cars, and other modern technologies. Spilhaus correctly identified many urban problems of the time, such as pollution and overpopulated city systems, and proposed that an experimental city be built in order to test technological solutions to these problems. If the solutions proved successful, they would be implemented throughout the nation. Later in 1966, Athelstan Spilhaus joined a steering committee formed by Otto Silha, the vice president of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, who was also pursuing the idea of a city of the future. The collaboration between the two allowed for the idea of the Minnesota Experimental City, or MXC, to develop. By 1967, the committee experienced triumph in the form of funding from 3 federal departments, as well as the support of Vice President Hubert Humphrey. In Spilhaus's plans for MXC, cars with internal combustion engines would be replaced by a guided rail system that would drive cars without polluting the air. Instead of a formal schooling system, centers for learning would be built throughout the city to create a lifelong learning system and eliminate the problem of overflowing schools.
If we put in the ultimate in a communication system so that people may communicate to work instead of commuting to work, it would reduce the needs of the transportation system. If we control the filth of factories at the source, then there's no need for zoning. So factories, schools and homes could all be in one complex. And this again reduces the need for transportation. Reduced transportation reduces the pollution and so forth and so on.
The planning and development of the city would be divided into phases of planning and construction. With Hubert Humphrey's loss to Richard Nixon in the presidential election of 1968, the experimental city lost federal support as the new administration believed the project to be unrealistic. In order to continue the project, Otto Silha turned to the Minnesota government, who established the Minnesota Experimental City Authority in 1971 with the purpose of locating a construction site for the city. By 1972, the possible construction sites for MXC had been narrowed down to 6 places. The plan was to build the experimental city after clearing forest and developments in the area.
There were those 6 places ultimately that were on the short list, with Douglas County and the area around Alexandria being the number 1 choice.
That site they discarded mainly because the farmers in that area basically said, we're going to, we'll fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to.
And then Aiken County being the number 6 choice. And but they really hadn't talked to anybody in Aiken County about that.
Because of the lack of public participation and the late release of plans, many different groups expressed concerns that the project was a tragedy in opposition of a rural lifestyle, and that it would do more harm than good for the environment.
I didn't know what I wanted for. I wouldn't moved out here if it happened. If I wanted to live in a friggin' city, I'd moved to the city.
In January of 1973, a march protesting the project was initiated in Swatara, a small town in Aiken County.
We were at all the meetings, voicing our point of view. I mean, we were never rowdy or anything like that, ever. One of the main meetings was held by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. That was a huge meeting.
Most of the people in the audience were from Swatara. And they had filed a petition opposing the experimental city and walked down here from Swatara in the winter, in January. We had folks from Hill City area and from Alexandria in the hearing room and environmental groups. And we held an all-day hearing and voted.
The Pollution Control Agency took a strong stance against MXC, expressing concerns that there was inadequate citizen participation in the planning, that environmental impact studies done on the project were incomplete, and that construction of such a city did not seem prudent. Because of the large amount of public opposition to the project, as well as opposition from the Pollution Control Agency, the Minnesota government abandoned MXC, leaving the protesters triumphant, and the project defunded and forgotten.
I think we can look to the work that each of these committees did, the Communication Committee and the Healthcare Committee and the Waste Disposal Committee, and what we see is our world today. That they proposed healthcare in this rural area that would involve a lot of remote medical care. And that's what we see here in North Dakota.
In Toronto, a technologically advanced neighborhood called Sidewalk Toronto is being planned with the help of the public. Just like the Minnesota Experimental City, Sidewalk Toronto plans to implement technology into city planning in such a way that it enhances the experience of living in that city. In South Korea, a high-tech city conceived in 2001 called Songdo has already been built. A major concept of the city is that it would implement means to limit pollution, an idea shared by the Minnesota Experimental City. Instead of a guided rail system, Songdo achieves this with a large number of walking paths and a variety of different forms of public transportation.
40% of the space is open space. You can leave your car at home and you can walk to Central Park. You can visit an office or a retail shopping center, all within walking distance.
But, truly, it was an idea, I think it was an idea whose time had not come. And, we're getting closer to it now.